I always forget to do that, to start and stop the lecture, the recording. Anyways, so again, we looked at, or the person on the video talked about some of the things that are unsustainable, right? Unsustainable is we as human beings and human societies have gotten in the way of the natural cycles, the way that nature has worked. So let's take a look at nature as a model of sustainability. So if left undisturbed by humans, natural systems operate in cycles, as we just saw, and have the ability to remain in balance for a long period of time. Does that mean that natural systems stay exactly the same? No, they don't. Natural systems change in response to changing conditions, and the diversity of those systems allows them to adapt. So again, nature, if left alone, is not exactly the same over thousands of years. Nature changes, but nature changes slowly, right? We, as we'll see in coming weeks, we as human beings are changing conditions on our planet in a way that makes it very difficult for nature to keep up with the changes that we as humans are making. Right, an ecosystem is a community of living and non-living things together in one space, and those ecosystems, those living creatures, are interacting as a system. And in that system, just like we saw on the slide there, energy and nutrients flow in cycles, right? Green plants, they're the producers. They take energy from the sun, and through photosynthesis, they create leaves and fruit and green beans and tomatoes, right? They create things that are eaten by herbivores who are eaten by other animals, right? This is all a cycle. So nature works in cycles. So in a natural system, the only energy input is from the sun. Everything else runs through cycles, and there's no waste, right? When a tree falls down, the leaves fall down, or an animal dies, right? There are producers, or excuse me, there are those things get broken down. Sorry, my wife just texted me to tell me that she's on her way home from school, right? Everything is used, everything is reused. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. So again, this is how nature works. This is not really how we as human beings work, but you'll see this slide a number of times throughout the semester, and I will say that we should strive to emulate this model in the way that we design and build and operate and maintain buildings. Okay, we're going to watch another video here, and hopefully I can find it. This one is called How Wolves Change Rivers, and this gives us an example of how in an ecosystem everything is interconnected, and that changes sometimes have intended or unintended consequences. So let me find this here, hold on. Yes, I like this one too, Ayan. I've watched it lots of times, and I enjoy it every time that I watch it. So and where to go? Here we go.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, that the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was a soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
Okay, well, and I think you said, yeah, that's a cool video. Yes, I think it's cool as well. I watched it many times, and I still find it to be interesting. Let me find my slides here again. Right, the point that I'm trying to make is that in nature, things are all interconnected. In this case, humans took action to fix something that they had done in the past, right? We killed all the wolves at one time, and that had some unintended consequences, right? Probably people didn't think about what would happen when we did that. And in this case, humans went back and fixed a mistake, and it had lots of positive benefits, positive consequences, right? So in nature, in an ecosystem, things are connected. If we make a change one place, either positive or negative, something else will happen someplace else. So again, in an ecosystem is a complex of living organisms in a physical environment and all the relationships between them in a particular unit of space, right, in one place. In Yellowstone Park, you know, in the backyard garden in my house, et cetera, et cetera. Another term that we want to keep in mind, I think we heard this in one of the previous videos, ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the things that nature provides to us as human beings that enhance our welfare. We may not always be aware of the services that nature provides to us, right? So a good ecosystem service, again, happens in my backyard garden, right? There's lots of bees in my garden that pollinate the crops that I'm growing in my backyard garden, the tomatoes and the cucumbers and the zucchini, right? None of those things would happen. None of those fruits would grow without the bees and the pollinators, right? That's an example of an ecosystem service. Services that nature provides to us that we as humans depend upon. Another attribute of a natural system, of a healthy natural system, is biodiversity, right? This is the richness of species that are found in a particular place, right? In a healthy natural system, there is lots of biodiversity, or lots of different species, and this gives natural systems a resiliency, the ability to adapt to changing conditions. Right? I said before that natural systems don't stay the same. They change in response to conditions, but diversity gives them resiliency, the ability to adapt. So let's look at what the place that we live, right? Illinois, what did Illinois look like before European settlers came here, right? Our state, Illinois, was covered by the prairie ecosystem, right? Grasses that stretched from about where we are west to the Rocky Mountains. These prairies appeared when the glaciers receded 8,000 or 10,000 years ago. Right? Illinois was covered by a sea of grasses. Right? Most of this prairie ecosystem is gone, although we're trying to restore them in some places. Right? There are some places where we as humans are trying to put this back together again, put this ecosystem back together again. So when the Europeans came here 150 or so years ago, you know, we found, or Europeans found, I said we, right, because I'm a European, right? That's my ancestry. We came here and discovered that the rich soils that existed, that the prairie ecosystem had built up over thousands of years, was a great place to grow corn and soybeans. So we plowed up that prairie and we started growing things. And we plowed up, as you see, the vast majority of that ecosystem, right? That prairie ecosystem provided services that are largely missing from the things that we as humans have put to replace the prairie ecosystem, right? The prairie ecosystem had large root systems in those plants, as we shall see, so it managed to keep the soil stable, make sure that rainfall ran, you know, when it rained, that rainfall percolated into the soil. And one important thing that the prairie ecosystem provided was carbon sequestration. Right? We'll learn about more of that in the coming weeks, right? But as we look at how we are going to take care of global climate change, one of the ways that we can do that is to go back to having healthy ecosystems and healthy plants that take carbon out of the air and put it back into the ground. And if you look at a prairie plants, they tend to have fairly deep root systems. They were adapted to grow in a climate like ours, right? We do get rainfall here in Illinois, but we have long periods of time during the summer when it doesn't rain, right? Obviously, my lawn looks pretty brown right now because it hasn't rained that terribly much, and I don't want to look at my water bill here because I've had to spend a lot of money watering, or a lot of time watering my garden to keep the tomatoes growing, right? Prairie plants were adapted to periods of low or no rainfall. And also those prairie plants over time built up that rich topsoil, right? The topsoil that the European settlers discovered when they came here and said, hey, let's grow corn and let's plow all that stuff and grow corn and soybeans. So what are we doing currently, right? Currently what we are doing to a large extent is we have what's called a monoculture, right? Instead of having a diverse community of plant and animal species in the same place, we as humans have decided that it's profitable for us, at least in the short term, to grow one thing in one place. Right? We've decided that growing corn or soybeans makes good business sense, at least in the short term, right? So that's how we are currently farming much of the area that was once the prairie. Right? In nature has diversity that allows it to adapt when conditions change. In a monoculture, there is obviously much less diversity and much less ability to respond to changing conditions. Right? So in our current system of agriculture in this part of the world, right, we have less ability to respond to changing conditions. We have soil erosion. We have runoff of fertilizers and pesticides. Right? In essence, we are mining that topsoil, right, that nature spent tens of or thousands of years building up. We, in the space of 100 or 200 years, could end up washing all that topsoil away. Right, I like this one here, 6 pounds of topsoil lost for every 1 pound of food you eat. It takes 500 years to create 1 inch of topsoil, right? Again, this is an example of something that isn't sustainable, right? The way that we are currently growing our food, we can't do it forever, right? Right? We can't continue to grow corn and soybeans the way that we're currently doing them, because eventually the topsoil will all be gone. Right? Will it happen in my lifetime or yours? I don't know. Right? One other issue we have is, and I'm starting to watch the clock here, all the pesticides and the fertilizers that we apply in the Mississippi River Basin, right? That's where most of the rain that falls in Illinois flows into the Mississippi River. A lot of it ends up impacting the water quality in the Gulf of Mexico. Pesticide use also impacts birds and pollinators, right? I just talked about the ecosystem services that are provided by pollinators, right? Where the pesticides that we use on all those crops are impacting all this thing. But this isn't a horticulture class or a biology class. This is a class on architecture and construction. So let me get to that in a minute. But I'm saying all these things to say that here's an example of something that we as humans are doing that is not sustainable. So let's talk a little bit about what sustainable architecture might mean. Okay. Sustainable architecture, right? That's what we are hoping to learn about, or what I'm going to teach you about this semester. Refers to the practice of designing buildings, designing, constructing, operating buildings that create environments that work to minimize the human use of resources, right? That's what we're trying to do here, is minimize the human use of resources, right? We still need buildings, we need places to learn, we need places to teach our children, we need houses to live in, we need, right? We need architecture and building, but we have to do it in a way that reduces resource use. And again, we're going to look at resource use more broadly construed by both the materials that it takes to build a building and what it takes to operate that building over its life cycle. Right, here's our little SARS nasty little bugger again, right? Right, how is COVID likely to change the business, our business of designing and constructing and operating buildings? I don't know, but I think we coming out of COVID are going to probably spend a little bit more time and attention on the health and safety of our buildings. Right, I know that this is happening at Triton already. Right, Triton has upgraded their ventilation systems and their air filtration systems to make them safer and better places to be. Right, that's the impact of COVID-19. So what are some of the attributes of sustainable architecture, right? We are looking for a healthful interior environment. Right? We want our buildings to be safe and healthy places to be. We want our buildings to be resource efficient. We want them to be efficient in a way that they use energy for heating and cooling, and we want them to be efficient in the way that in the use of materials to construct those buildings. We want our buildings to have ecologically benign materials, right? Benign means not harmful. Right? We want to have safe, non-harmful materials in our buildings. We want our buildings to have good environmental form. We want them to relate to the site and the climate that they are built in, the region that they are built in. Right? We don't necessarily want to build the same building in Duluth, Minnesota that we would build in Chicago or Tucson, Arizona, right? Those are different climates, different regions. The building should be built differently in each of those areas. And we want to have good design. We want to have efficient, long-lasting buildings that work well, well-built, easy to use, and beautiful, right? So those are some of the attributes of sustainable architecture, things that we'll be striving to learn more about this semester. Some of the key features of green buildings, right, where they are located. Right, ideally, we want to build, if we have a choice where we're going to build our building, we want it to be built near other buildings, near existing infrastructure, near public transportation. Right, when we design and build a building out in the outer ring suburbs, we've essentially baked in the transportation use into that site for a long period of time, right? Buildings last a long time, ideally, so we want to minimize the amount of energy it takes, the amount of resources it takes to get to and from the building. Right. Key features of green buildings are that they are energy efficient. We want to minimize the use of energy in the building, minimize the use of water and other resources in the building by integrated design. Oh, wife just came home, got to close my office door. So we want to have that building envelope, the building shell, be as efficient as it possibly can be. And then once we do that, we have the potential of making that building use, create the energy that it needs with on-site solar or wind power. We want to have water efficiency in our buildings as well. Minimize the use of domestic water that comes from off-site. Retain rainwater on-site. Minimize stormwater discharges. Minimize wastewater discharges. We'll talk about these things as the semester wears on. This is actually a picture of I don't know if it's there anymore, but up on the roof of City Hall in downtown Chicago, way back when they had a green roof up there. I don't know if it's still there or not. Green or sustainable buildings are wise in their use of materials. We want to build, if we can, using recycled or reused materials. We want to use materials that are renewable, right? Wood is an example of a renewable resource. Ideally, we want to strive to use materials that are obtained locally or near the building site, so we don't have to truck stuff halfway across the country to get to our site. And we want to have materials that are non-toxic in their production or their use, right? Wise use of materials. We want buildings to provide a healthy environment for the people like us that need to be inside of them, right? We're not all sitting in a classroom together. We're all sitting in our own houses. Hopefully our houses are healthy places to be, but right, we want buildings to be well ventilated, generous amounts of daylight and views and fresh air, non-toxic materials used in the construction of the building, also non-toxic materials used in the cleaning. Right, those are all things that we want to strive for to have a healthy green building. Renewable building materials are those materials that are found in nature and used in a way where their availability and quality does not diminish over time, right? In our first lecture, we learned about the German forester, right, in the early notions of sustainability, right, managing forests in the way that their quality and availability does not diminish over time, right? If we use sustainably harvested wood, then we can claim in our building that we're using material whose quality does not diminish over time, that it lasts a long time. Right? We have the possibility when we build a building or design a building of using materials that come from a source that's not brand new, that might come from another building, come from industrial materials, right? Shipping containers, right? These are all potential sources of recycled building materials. The buildings do not exist in isolation. We want to make sure that our building relates to its site and to the surrounding community. This is something that, right, if we expend energy and resources building a structure and that building no longer serves the purpose that it was originally built for, we want to strive to reuse that building and adapt it to another purpose, right? That's a lot less use a lot less resources to do that than it does to tear a building down and build a new one, right? We want to strive to conserve those resources and adaptively reuse the building. So again, in summary, what are some of the attributes of sustainable architecture? Right, a healthy interior environment, efficient in its use of resources, benign or non-harmful materials, relates to the site, and has good design. And right, here's my wrap-up slide. But why, this is my pitch here, right? I've honed this pitch over the years that I've delivered the course. Why should I be concerned, or why should you be concerned about sustainability, right? These are ideas that will be part of your education and your professional practice, your career, right? If you learn this skill set, this will help set you apart in the marketplace, right? That's part of the reason why we're now doing the LEED GA training and sitting for the LEED GA, or having you sit for the LEED GA exam to earn a credential that might set you apart when you're out looking for a job. As we'll learn in the coming weeks, there's a lot of challenges that we face currently, like climate change, water scarcity, resource availability, right? These are all things that are going to be happening during the time that you are practicing whatever you do in the construction industry, right? So you have the ability to make a positive contribution both in your career and in your personal life. So that's why we are learning about sustainability in the architecture program. Any questions, folks? I hope you're still with me. I'm watching the clock, and of course, the clock ticks away as it always does, right? That's the way things work. So let me flip to one other